A proverb from days of old and a Quaker Oat cereal box goes a little something like this. Life is full of surprises. Just when one thinks that there's nothing salvageable or cathartic that's going to happen to one's day, all of a sudden, whether it be from divine intervention or just pure blatant coincidence, there would just be something that happens in one phase of time that nobody could possibly ever expect, that by the time it happens, it ends up actually being a purely wholesome and satisfying experience. And for a flame-throwing movie enthusiast like myself, this is one of those times. But before we get into that said surprise, how about a little bit of context? Manufactured by Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson, Dungeons & Dragons is a tabletop role-playing game derivative of the 1971 war game Chainmail, in which players collaborate by creating their own characters and backstory, roll the dice to determine their character's attributes or outcomes to a certain situation, like a dangerous encounter or a battle, all the while telling and sharing epic adventures, resolving intricate situations, exploring mythical realms, creatures, buried treasure, and best of all, having fun with all of your friends. It's ultimately a roundtable gaming experience that involves good storytelling, teamwork, and imagination. And yet, I've never played a single game in my entire life. My knowledge is only limited to what the game is, how it works, and what I saw in the movie. Other than that, I know little to nothing about the lore, the abilities, the characters, anything in its entirety. But what I do know is that the RPG was such a revolutionary phenomenon that it laid the groundwork for future sequels, expansion in the mythology, and became the inspiration for a vast collection of tabletop games, video games, fantasy novels, even a movie that came out in the year 2000 starring Marlon Wayans and Jeremy Irons. And it was so freaking bad. But as much as everything in that movie was such a catastrophic disaster, boy did Jeremy Irons' presence as Profion make the experience so much magical. Let the blood rain from the sky! He did all of that just to pay for his castle in Ireland. Never changed, Jeremy. Never changed. But as the movie deities dictated the course of history as 2 decades gone by, what to our wondering eye would appear but another Dungeons & Dragons movie in the 2023 year. And before getting into this movie, admittedly I was expecting it for it to be a mediocre, mundane escapade full of dimensionless characters, overcompensating humor that has no wit to its jokes, and a cliche derivative narrative that doesn't do any service to the games or its fan base. And I could not have been more wrong. In reality, Dungeons & Dragons Honor Among Thieves is such a great fantasy movie that honors the property and the fan base that helped elevate it to the phenomenon that it is currently right now. With that context gone and out of the way, as your dungeon master, here's your premise. Your story follows a fellowship of raiders that is led by a bard, a barbarian, and a mage. After embarking on countless quests of burglary, they, alongside a rogue and his shadowy accomplice, decide to hatch one more scheme of obtaining a mythical relic. But after the crew was disbanded, after their mission was failed, with some escaping with their lives, others being sent to prison, and an evil artifact falling into the wrong hands, our heroes must reunite with new allies along the way to do whatever it takes to prevent the destruction of the kingdom of Neverwinter. Sounds pretty cool, right? Well, look, it may acquire the repeated storytelling premise of a band of unlikely heroes trying to save the day and themselves from unfathomable odds a la Seven Samurai, Magnificent Seven, Sahara, and even current James Gunn flicks like Guardians of the Galaxy and The Suicide Squad. But the one component that makes the story so enjoyable is not only how tight and fluid and coherent it is, and how it establishes its rules well, it's mainly because of the backbone of your story that makes it worth it. It's the characters of the ragtag group of thieves. So like the beginning of every D&D game, let's talk about the characters and how well they play their parts. As a man of terrific leading man bravado, Chris Pine delivers such great charisma and conviviality to his performance as Edgin Darvis. His jovial attitude and straight man prowess makes him a joy to watch, as he also shares tremendous chemistry with the cast. And the material that is given to him is also great, where you have some writers who I'm not naming names, would take this lively leading main character and just turn him into an incompetent goofball. The filmmakers instead portray it as a guy who wants to rewrite the wrongs of his life, such as a subplot involving him and his relationship with his estranged daughter, and to avenge his prior mistakes and tragedies that make him want to pursue that personal goal of his. And what that goal is, I cannot tell you what it is. You're just gonna have to see the movie for yourself. He's somebody with an internal drive, and while he may be flawed in certain departments, such as like fighting or whenever he's trying to make a plan, he's not an idiot. He's not the inept butt of the joke. And much like the other characters in the movie that we're gonna get into, you root for them and you want for them to have believable character development as the film goes on. Justice Smith is the sleeper performance highlight as Simon, a magician who struggles with self-confidence due to his prior failures and strives to live up to his family's legacy. He nails a bunch of the scenes in the movie that require his comedic timing, and he pulls it off without a hitch, and he has a genuinely satisfying payoff to his character arc. Michelle Rodriguez is kind of acting the same way as she always has been for the past couple of years, but has a strong character as Holga, a barbarian who develops a kinetic friendship with Edgin, and while appearing nonchalant, has personal issues of her own. Sophia Hillis is also great as the snappy, quick-witted tiefling named Doric, a tiefling being a half-human, half-devil, who manages to surprise the entire crowd by delivering some of the best moments of the entire flick. And despite the lack of screen time that he has in the movie, Regé-Jean Page's charm of performance makes up for the majority of the time that he turns up. Plus, Zink's stoicism allows the directors and writers' comedic timing and ability to make fun of the flawless heroic archetype to work effortlessly. It was also nice to see Hugh Grant appear and act magnetically as one of the main antagonists of the movie, Forge Fitzwilliam, a con man who scammed his way into being the leader of Neverwinter. However, there's not much I can say about the actual main villain of the movie, Sofina. Essentially, your run-of-the-mill fantasy evildoer, a follower in the Red Wizards of Thay who wants to abide by her master's will by ruling over the realms by way of changing everyone into an undead legion. Daisy Head is acting adequately in the role, warranting a very creepy and mysterious performance. There's not much in terms of material for the script for her to work with, aside from the fact that she's evil because she's evil. On to my next point. In a fantasy movie, one of the things that usually pops out at you the first time that you see it would have to be the production design. In Honor Among Thieves, the production design is tremendous. It truly feels like a lot of dedication and heart were put into the interior and exterior designs of each set. There's so much attention to detail for the wooden taverns, villages, even royal hallways, bedrooms, even the entire kingdom of Neverwinter itself. Thus, it makes us lost in the entire world as if we want to be a part of that realm ourselves. No practical sets feel under-budgeted or staged and half-assed. In fact, when the characters are surrounded in a blue screen set, the CG locations conceived are believable to the naked eye, such as the hellish cryptic Underdark or the Neverwinter arenas with a transfiguring labyrinth. By the way, that's another thing that this movie surprised me on, were its visual effects. Aside from the polished, computer-generated imagery and textures for beasts such as Doric's owlbear or the clinically obese, fire-breathing dragon Thimberchild, this movie does an unbelievable job of utilizing prosthetics, animatronics, and puppets for the beast folk, which are basically humanoid versions of mythological creatures, and thanks to the effects team of Legacy Effects, it's shockingly realistic. Some of the examples in the movie include two judges during Holga and Edgin's sentencing. One is played by a griffin, and the other one is a dragonborn. Or you just notice just simple touches such as wing movement, walking or arm movement, or dialogue syncing with one of the animatronics. Then it makes the puppets stand out as characters rather than just a cool effect that the effects team did. The other one is where Zink is trying to save a baby tabaxi, which is basically just half cat, half human, that is stuck inside of a large fish. And how it is pulled off in the film absolutely stunned me. I can't believe that Goldstein and Daly would take a crack at something like this, because you would never expect effects out of a multi-million-dollar movie like this. But regardless, wonderful job by the directors and the effects team involved. Okay, so I talked about stuff that was put into the production and some good stuff about the characters in the story. What about the spectacle? Well, my good friend, you are here for a treat. The action is impressive to say the least. In fact, a bunch of the stunt work and the fight movements are choreographed graciously, making every fight engaging without a hint of it being choreographed. And the camera work does a surprising job of allowing the viewer to take in the action as it's happening in moments such as Dork running away from the guards of Neverwinter in like this extended long chase scene where it's all one tracking shot. Or adrenaline-fueled moments such as Zank taking on the undead soldiers in an incredible sword fight. But if there's one more slight cut against the movie, minus the primary antagonist, it's the movie's way of delivering exposition. It's done for better and for worse. Where the exposition is used in a genius and natural degree is through exposition by Edgin as he's talking about his backstory before he's being sentenced in prison. And another being a hilarious bit in which the main characters are trying to acquire information by going to a graveyard full of fallen soldiers, and they can only do it through an enchantment by asking each cadaver 5 questions before they go back to being dead. And what follows next is just as funny as you would expect it to be. But there are times where the expository dialogue takes a little bit of a balancing act when someone who isn't familiar with the lore would have characters explain information revolving around the mechanics or backstories of a certain individual that average attendees might not even catch up on the first time, and they would just repeat it just in case. But because of the repetition, D&D fans and those who paid really good to the story are going to look at it and go, well, thank you for telling me this information. Why did you have to tell me this again? It's not egregious, but I believed it would have been worked better had the dialogue been tweaked so that way both parties can comprehend information. With all that said and done, Dungeons & Dragons Honor Among Thieves is something that should immediately be on your watch list, and is perhaps the best adaptation that we have seen of a tabletop RPG in quite a long time. In a year where the first 3 months haven't been the greatest, aside from like Creed 3 and maybe John Wick 4, this was such a remarkable, unexpectedly comedic experience that I wouldn't mind picking up on Blu-ray when it comes out or watching it a second time. So yeah, I gotta say, D&D is a thumbs up for me. And thus concludes your D&D experience. Until we meet again for our next adventure, my name is Luke Nukem. Thou hast been blowneth away.